Hey guys, so this is going to be the last video for chapter 13. So section 13.4 is on the case study design. So remember, chapter 13, we've been talking about descriptive research strategies, um, which are only for describing, not explaining. And we talked about the observational research design. We talked about survey research design, and now we're going to talk about case study design. So those are the three main descriptive kinds. Um, and so um, this is going to be going over the last learning objective, number 9 for the chapter, which is describing the general characteristics of case studies or case study designs, and identifying the different situations where these kinds of designs are well suited and explaining the strengths and weaknesses of them, of course. Um, so again, I want to begin with a word of caution like I have in the other 3 videos. Your book cautions you that lots of research strategies can use case study type um, designs, where you are getting a lot of detailed information from a small group of people or one person. But if the intent, again, is to explain or do cause and effect or any other thing other than just simply describing, then it is not a case study design specifically. A case study design by itself, remember, is just descriptive in nature. Okay, so a lot of research in behavioral sciences tends to emphasize the study of groups rather than single individuals, right? Um, but there can be value from studying single individuals or very small groups. The reason that behavioral sciences tends to emphasize the study of groups is because we can observe effects across a variety of different personal characteristics, and we can generalize better to larger populations, right? Um, but there is a little bit that is lost, in that for unique circumstances or for individual effects that only would happen in a unique set of circumstances, and you would miss that by studying a group instead of studying those smaller groups or an individual. And so that's where the case study design comes in. So to introduce you to this fourth discussion on descriptive strategies. Some argue that the intensive study of individuals, which is called idiographic approach, um, is okay. Just a minute. Is just as important as the study of groups, which is called the not. Let me try that again. Nomotheic. That's or nomothetic, actually, rather. Um, Approach. So, um, for clinical research specifically, studying individuals seems to be a better approach, um, because um, treatment plans are often very individualized, right? And what works for somebody may not work for somebody else because every person has their own unique characteristics and set of circumstances, right? And so, especially in clinical research, the idiographic approach seems to be better. But again, it depends on what exactly you're studying and where and how you want to apply it, what situations you're wanting to apply it to. But for the case study, again, it's that in-depth, very detailed description of a single individual or a very, very small group of individuals. Um, it could involve an intervention or a treatment administered by the researcher, and then we're again seeing how that treatment or therapy or intervention affects that person. But it also could be what's called a case history instead of a case study, where there's no treatment or intervention. We're just trying to get a very detailed description of a person or a group of people, and we just want to get as much detailed information about them as possible. And so that would be more of a case history, because there's no, treatment or intervention. Um, so for applications, what kind of situations do we apply this to? I really like the way that this first paragraph in your textbook puts it. Um, it is most case studies are most commonly used in clinical psychology situations, as I mentioned, but it can be used in a lot of different areas in behavioral sciences. Um, Although, again, the group studies can help you discover general laws of behavior, usually more readily. Um, Group studies are again limited because they overlook the importance of the individual differences, unique situations. And so by looking at these individual variables, we can actually get valuable information that can add to the knowledge that we already know from groups, um, or can actually lead to general laws and theories as well. It may introduce something that we didn't realize before that we can say we need to study that more, and we can study that individually, but then we can go on to study it in a group as well. And the two together can provide lots of detailed information that we didn't know before. Um, and the example they give is, of course, Piaget, because his developmental psychology things, which are considered fundamental now, um, a lot of it started largely based on him observe detailed observations of his own children. He was just observing his own children and using them as a case study, essentially, and writing down just very detailed descriptions. And those observations and descriptions um, led to a lot of other, theories and information. And so um, that is a great way of explaining the value of case studies. Um, because there are a lot of weaknesses you'll see in a second, but there are a lot of strengths too, and a lot of times the strengths aren't um, emphasized as much as the weaknesses. Okay, so applications, again, rare phenomena or unusual clinical cases. Um, One of those things is gaining information about mental disorders um, that you can't really just do in a group setting because they're rare, and also, again, everybody experiences these things differently. And the example your book uses is multiple personality disorder, because contrary to media and popular belief, it is a very rare disorder. And so they use the example of Eve from the 1950s, who had three distinct personalities. Um, and then Another way is studying individuals with brain injuries. Um, Obviously, we can't go around injuring people's brains to study them, but when people have already had brain injuries occur, we can study them individually to learn more about how the brain works, about those underlying neurological mechanisms. And of course, the example that they give in your book is
Um, the my I think my AirPods battery just died, so it probably switched to my iPad's microphone. So that is okay. We will roll with it. Um, the HM is the initials they used to protect his identity while he was alive, but they studied his brain and learned a lot about how our brain stores memories and the memory process because of his injury. We were able to learn a lot about the brain. And then also new therapy methods or applications. Of course, those are going to be, again, very individualized and for the person. But if there is success shown from these case studies, then more research can be done in more people and can be replicated and can be applied to other situations and other people. Um, One of the examples in your book, which was a great example, I think, was in the researchers noticed that when they were treating anorexia patients, that even though they were not showing the anorexic behavior anymore, they still had a lot of food anxiety. That underlying fear and anxiety about food was still there. And so they decided to implement a food anxiety treatment along with the anorexia treatment and found a lot more success in helping those patients with that. And that started with just one woman. And because of the success with that, they proceeded to replicate it with other patients, and were able to, help a lot more people that way. And so here are the strengths and weaknesses. This is table 13.3 in your book. So just going over these really quickly, we've kind of talked about some of these already. For the strengths, you're not averaging over a diverse group of people, and so you're not losing the unique parts or the individualized parts that can have valuable information, individualized reactions to certain things or treatments, or responses that you might not get when you average across a group. You're also getting a very detailed description, much more detailed information than you get from any of the other research strategies or designs. It's also very vivid, powerful, and convincing, of course, because it is a lot of information. It's very personalized to that individual. It's a lot of information. You feel like you get to know this person. And so stories like Eve and HM and things like that make an impact on people more than just statistics, group statistics. And that can lead to people being willing to fund more research and look into things more, and also be more willing to believe and accept certain things, certain truths that we discover in the scientific process that they wouldn't necessarily be as willing to accept or believe with just cold facts or statistics. Having a personal story behind it can help as well. It's also, of course, very compatible with clinical work. Some clinical work can't really be done in any other way. And then also helps us to study those rare and unusual events, again, because we can't really study them in any other way. And we can also identify exceptions to the rule. Again, group research does lead to general laws and truths about behavior, and that's great. But there are, of course, going to be exceptions to a lot of those laws or rules. I'm using air quotes, you can't see me, but there's always going to be exceptions in individual cases. And so this can help identify those situations. The weaknesses, again, it's limited in its generalization, so it lacks that external validity. We can't apply it as readily to a larger population because a lot of the cases are so unique and individualized. There also is, of course, the potential for selective bias and subjective interpretation, again, because the researcher is only going to study people that they can study, right? So they're not going to write up a case study and do this detailed report on someone that there's no results found. So the only thing that gets reported is when there is something to report. But also, it's all being filtered through the person that's documenting this entire thing, the researcher or researchers. And so it's all being filtered through them. And so they may only be writing down the things that support and maybe consciously or unconsciously ignoring the things that don't support what they think is going to happen or what they want to see. And so, of course, there's that subjectivity involved. And so it does lack internal validity as well to a certain extent. And so it is low on both external and internal validity for that reason. And of course, the other reason it lacks the internal validity is because we're describing only. We are not explaining. And even in some cases where people are trying to explain, there's always alternative explanations because the way it is structured is only to describe. We're not ruling out anything. There's no controlling anything to try to get at a cause and effect or anything like that. So replication is the biggest thing that case studies have going for them as far as combating all of these weaknesses. Because, again, like with the anorexia and food anxiety research, once they discovered that it was very beneficial for that young woman, then they were able to replicate it with other women, and I'm sure probably men as well, over time, and show that it was valid and was reliable because they were getting those results every time. So replication is the best way to help fight the weaknesses of the case study research design. Okay, and so let's get to the learning check. Again, here's the table we were just looking at, table 13.3, and here's our learning check. Which of the following accurately describes the idiographic approach to research? Remember that idiographic is the individual part, not the group. So it's the intense study of one individual. Also, just to point this out, this says direct observation of individuals without their knowledge or interviewing people in a small group setting. Those maybe could have tripped you up a little bit because it says individuals and small group. The case study can involve lots of different things, observing, interviews. It can involve lots of those things. But the reason those are not the answers is because case studies are not without the person's knowledge. In most cases, they know. I mean, this is an intense thing. This researcher is going to spend a lot of time talking with and observing this person. And so they're going to know. But also, and again, a lot of times it's in a clinical setting, so it's going to be part of the clinician, part of that clinical experience. So they're going to know. And then interviewing people in a small group setting, again, most of the time it's an individual, but if it is a small group, it could be that, but just an interview is not a case study. It has to be that intensive, very detailed, descriptive study is what an idiographic approach is. And so next question is, which of the following is typically examined in a case study? Again, as we've just talked about, it is going to be a single individual is the typical part of a case study. It may be a single disease or psychiatric disorder. It may be a single clinical treatment. It may be a single group, but most of the time, and the defining nature of a case study is that it's a single person, like Eve or HM or whatever. And then last, what kind of research was used to study the brain surgery patient HM? We just talked about him, who lost the ability to store new memories. And again, hopefully you know, because we've just been talking about it, that is a case study. Again, there could have been some observation. There could have been you could pull correlational data from a case study. But when you're specifically studying one person intensively, again, with all the detail, and your goal is to just simply describe, it is a case study. Okay. So that knowledge check, it goes over what we just talked about already in our learning check. The descriptive research strategy we're reviewing, we have reached the end of the chapter. In the first video, we talked about the purpose of the descriptive research strategy. And again, that's a snapshot to describe only, not trying to explain. And then the second question, strengths and weaknesses of observational research design. We talked about that in the second video. Mainly, there's lots, but mainly it's that it's natural and flexible. You're getting natural responses from a person. You're getting real behavior, and it's flexible in what you're able to observe a lot of different things. But the downside is that there's not a lot of control going on, and so it can take a lot of time. It can be very time consuming. The third video rather was about survey research design, the strengths and weaknesses there. You can gather a lot of information very quickly. So it's nice for that, and from a lot of different people. You can get a lot of participants at once. But again, the downside is that it is self-reported, and so there can be lack of authenticity in self-reported data and lack of accuracy. And then lastly, in this video, we talked about the case study design. Again, strengths is that you get lots of detailed information, and it helps you study unique situations and individuals. but it also downside lacks internal validity and external validity. We can't really generalize like we can with other strategies. So that is a quick little overview there, or review, I guess I should say. So here is our summary. Again, these are the 9 learning objectives that we talked about. There's the first 5 and there's the last 4. Again, this is in your book, of course, at the end. Make sure you review all of that. Make sure that all of that sounds familiar to you and makes sense, and that you understand it now that we've gone through all of chapter 13. And if you guys have any questions, as always, just send me an email.